On an uneventful autumn evening in the quaint town of Ridgewood, nestled snugly in the Appalachian Mountains, everything seemed as serene as a catnap in a sunbeam. The old-fashioned houses slumbered under a star-speckled sky, and the crisp air carried the sweet aroma of pine and distant wood smoke. Stanley Parker, a self-proclaimed amateur astronomer with a borderline obsessive interest in the cosmos, was hunkered down in his cluttered observatory on the town's outskirts. It was his haven, a little slice of paradise where he could indulge in his space obsession away from the mundane routines of Ridgewood. As a kid, Stanley had dreamt of space adventures, but somehow life had nudged him into becoming a high school science teacher. Despite the detour, his evenings still revolved around stargazing. Tonight, however, the cosmos had decided to stir things up. Stanley was peering through his trusty old telescope, scanning familiar constellations. He'd mapped these stars so many times they felt like old pals. But then, something out of the ordinary streaked across the sky. A flash of light, so dazzling it made the northern lights look like a flashbulb. At first, Stanley figured it was just another meteorite, but as he tracked its path, he realized it was moving with all the grace of a drunk duck. "What the blazes?" Stanley muttered, fiddling with the telescope. The object was plummeting towards Earth, but way too slowly and erratically to be a mere space rock. Stanley's heart began to race as he figured out its crash site, just a few miles away, deep in the forest. He was practically vibrating with excitement. Grabbing a backpack packed with a flashlight, a camera, and other essential gadgets, Stanley scrambled out of his modest home and leaped into his aging pickup truck. The tires crunched over gravel as he sped down the empty roads, heart racing with every bump. The woods around him were as dark as a black hole, and his imagination was running wild with alien possibilities. When Stanley finally reached the crash site, the sky seemed unnaturally dim, as though someone had turned down the star dial. He parked at the forest's edge and trekked on foot, following a faint glow. The forest was eerily silent, save for the crunch of leaves underfoot. He emerged into a small clearing to find a smoking crater with edges that glowed faintly. In the center of the crater lay an object half buried in dirt, a large, egg-shaped thing that looked like it had escaped from a sci-fi movie set. It wasn't made of any material Stanley recognized. It was smooth, glossy, and adorned with swirling patterns that pulsed with a soft, otherworldly light. Stanley circled the egg-like object, trying to convince himself it was just some advanced piece of space junk. But as he touched its surface, it responded with a soft hum, and the patterns glowed brighter. Stanley jumped back, nearly falling into the crater, but couldn't tear his eyes away. The egg began to crack open with a musical chime, and Stanley's heart leaped into his throat. As the egg split apart, he gasped at the sight of a figure curled inside. Initially, it looked like a surreal, otherworldly sculpture, but as the light dimmed and the smoke cleared, Stanley saw her, a girl, glowing faintly with the same light as the egg, her long silver hair flowing like liquid moonlight. She looked human, but with an undeniable alien touch. Her eyes fluttered open, revealing deep, luminous blue orbs that swirled like galaxies. Their gazes locked, and Stanley felt a bizarre, electric connection, as if she was peering straight into his very soul. The girl, now sitting up with surprising grace, began to speak in a melodious, unfamiliar language. Though Stanley didn't understand her words, the meaning was clear. She was lost. "Who are you?" Stanley asked, though it was more of a stammer. The girl, with a faint, pained smile, responded in broken English. "My name is Carly. I come from a place far beyond your world, a place called Zogther." Stanley's brain nearly short-circuited. Zogther? That sounded like something out of a comic book. Carly continued. "We were explorers, seeking knowledge and peace. But something terrible happened. Our ship was attacked by a dark force we call the Shadow." Stanley felt a chill. The idea of an advanced alien civilization being destroyed was horrifying. If such a force could obliterate a ship capable of interstellar travel, what hope did Earth have? Carly's eyes glistened with fear and sadness. "It hunts those who travel the stars. It's a force that feeds on fear and chaos." Stanley's mind raced. If this shadow was as dangerous as Carly described, then Earth was in serious trouble. "We need help," Stanley said firmly. "Someone who understands this kind of technology." Carly's eyes brightened slightly. "Do you know anyone?" Stanley thought for a moment before nodding. "Dr. Evelyn Harper. She's an expert in astrophysics and advanced technology. If anyone can help, it's her." Carly agreed, though she looked exhausted. "We should go to her before it's too late." Stanley helped Carly into the guest room of his humble abode. As she settled in a bed, he lingered in the doorway, unsure of what to say. Carly's voice, soft and filled with gratitude, broke the silence. "Thank you for helping me. I don't know what I would have done without you." Stanley managed a small, reassuring smile. "You're not alone anymore. We'll figure this out together." The next morning, as dawn broke over Ridgewood, Stanley's thoughts were a whirlwind. Carly slept fitfully, her dreams likely plagued by the horrors she had fled. Stanley's peaceful town seemed blissfully unaware of the cosmic threat looming on the horizon. With a cup of coffee in hand and the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, Stanley prepared for the day ahead. He knew they needed to act fast. He had never imagined being thrust into such a fantastical situation, but he was determined. If Carly could face the unknown with bravery, then so could he. As the fire crackled softly in the hearth and the stars continued their silent dance across the sky, Stanley Parker began to understand that his life would never be ordinary again. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon when Stanley Parker and Carly set out for Dr. Evelyn Harper's house. The cool morning air was filled with the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves, a far cry from the galactic drama unfolding in Stanley's life. Carly, despite her exhaustion, seemed more at ease with each passing mile. Stanley, on the other hand, was a bundle of nerves, bouncing between excitement and sheer panic. As they drove through the winding roads of Ridgewood, Carly glanced out the window, her luminous blue eyes reflecting the golden morning light. "It's beautiful here," she said softly, her voice tinged with wonder. "But it's so different from Zogther." Stanley shot her a reassuring smile. "Yeah, it's not exactly the cosmic metropolis, but it has its charm." "Zogther," Carly continued, "is a world of endless skies and floating cities. Our technology is far beyond what you have here. But it seems like your world has its own kind of magic." Stanley chuckled. "Magica? Well, we do have squirrels that steal from our bird feeders and a town gossip who's practically a superhero in her own right." Carly raised an eyebrow. "I would love to hear more about your superhero gossip." As they reached the outskirts of town, Stanley's pickup truck trundled up the gravel driveway, leading to Dr. Evelyn Harper's home. A charming, somewhat eccentric house filled with gadgets, gizmos, and a collection of star maps that looked like they could have come from a sci-fi movie set. Stanley parked the truck and turned to Carly. "Ready for this?" Carly nodded, her silver hair shimmering in the sunlight. "As ready as I'll ever be." They walked up to the front door, and Stanley knocked, his heart pounding like a drumline. Moments later, the door creaked open to reveal Dr. Evelyn Harper, an astrophysicist with a reputation for eccentricity that matched her genius. She had an air of organized chaos about her, with wild curls of hair and a pair of glasses perched on the tip of her nose. "Stanley, how delightful to see you," Dr. Harper greeted, peering around the door. Her eyes widened as she took in Carly. "And who might this be?" "This is Carly," Stanley said, trying to sound casual despite the gravity of the situation. "She's from, well, another world." Dr. Harper's curiosity piqued instantly. "Another world, you say? Do come in." Inside, the house was a trove of scientific wonders, scattered star maps, half-finished experiments, and an entire wall dedicated to what looked like alien artifacts. Dr. Harper led them to a cozy living room cluttered with papers and tech. Sit, shoot. Tell me everything." Stanley and Carly took seats on a couple of overstuffed chairs that looked like they'd seen better days. Carly looked around, her eyes filled with both awe and anxiety. Stanley took a deep breath and started recounting the events of the previous night, from the meteorite-like object to Carly's dramatic emergence from the egg. Dr. Harper listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes and muttering to herself. When Stanley finished, she sat back, adjusting her glasses. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. This could be the discovery of the century. Carly's eyes met Dr. Harper's. But it's not just a discovery. There's a serious threat, something called the shadow. It's dangerous, and it's coming. Dr. Harper's enthusiasm was replaced by concern. A cosmic threat, you say? This changes everything. We need to understand this shadow and how to combat it. Carly nodded. We have to act quickly. The shadow is a force that feeds on fear and chaos. It destroyed my ship and my people. Dr. Harper's face grew serious. All right, let's get to work. We need to analyze the egg and see if it holds any clues about this shadow. Stanley and Carly watched as Dr. Harper's scientific instincts took over. She bustled about, gathering equipment and preparing for analysis. It wasn't long before they were all huddled around a makeshift lab setup in the garage, where Dr. Harper examined fragments of the egg and analyzed its properties with a variety of instruments. Hours passed in a blur of scientific jargon and rapid calculations. Stanley, who was far more accustomed to grading papers than handling alien artifacts, found himself increasingly fascinated by the process. Carly, though tired, was a trooper, providing what information she could about Zogther and the shadow. Dr. Harper eventually paused, rubbing her temples. This is no ordinary material. It has properties that don't match anything we've encountered before. It's almost as if it's a living substance, reacting to its environment. Stanley's eyes widened. Living? Like it has its own consciousness? Dr. Harper nodded. It's possible. And if the shadow is as malevolent as Carly describes, it might be able to manipulate or interact with such materials in ways we can't yet understand. Carly's face fell. If the shadow can influence or corrupt such materials, it could be tracking us through the very things we're studying. Stanley felt a shiver down his spine. So, what do we do now? Dr. Harper took a deep breath. We need to get a better understanding of the shadow's nature and its weaknesses. We also need to reach out to other experts. There might be more we can learn from those who have studied cosmic threats or even interstellar diplomacy. Carly looked hopeful but exhausted. I'll do whatever I can to help. Just please don't let this force reach your world. Dr. Harper nodded decisively. We'll do everything in our power. But for now, Carly, you need rest. And Stanley, you need to brace yourself. We're in for a cosmic roller coaster. Stanley gave a determined nod. As the sun began to set and the first stars emerged in the twilight sky, he realized that his life had shifted from mundane to extraordinary. With Carly and Dr. Harper by his side, he felt a strange sense of purpose. They were on the brink of uncovering something monumental, and whatever came next, he was ready to face it head-on. That night, as Stanley lay in bed, his mind swirled with possibilities. The universe had just become a lot more complex and a lot more exciting. And as he drifted off to sleep, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real adventure was just beginning. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, with Ridgewood bathed in the soft light of early fall. The small town seemed peaceful, but Stanley Parker, Carly, and Dr. Evelyn Harper were all too aware of the cosmic storm brewing beneath the surface. Stanley had barely slept. His thoughts were consumed by the looming threat and the alien girl who had become the center of his universe. Over breakfast, he glanced at Carly, who was sipping a cup of coffee with an otherworldly grace, as if she were already accustomed to the quirky routines of Earth. Dr. Harper, her usual exuberance tempered by the gravity of their situation, was hunched over a stack of research papers and a cup of her beloved herbal tea. All right, team, she said, breaking the silence. We have a lot of ground to cover today. We need to gather more data on the shadow and assess any potential risks it poses. Carly nodded, her blue eyes reflecting a mix of determination and worry. What can I do to help? We need more information about your world and the technology you used, Dr. Harper replied. If we can understand how the shadow attacked your vessel, we might find a way to defend against it. And we need to locate the crash site of your ship. Stanley chimed in. I'll go back to the site and see if I missed anything. Maybe there are clues we overlooked. Dr. Harper's face lit up with a thought. Perfect. And while you're at it, take some samples of the environment around the crash site. We might find something that could help us understand the shadow's presence. With a plan in place, Stanley and Carly set out for the crash site, while Dr. Harper stayed behind to analyze the data they already had. The drive through the forest was filled with an uneasy quiet. Carly's presence was a constant reminder that their reality had expanded beyond their wildest imaginations. As they approached the clearing, Stanley's pickup truck bumped over the rough terrain. The crater was still there, its edges scarred from the previous night's impact. Carly stepped out of the truck and surveyed the scene with a mix of sadness and resolve. "This place," Carly said softly, "is where everything changed for me." Stanley handed her a pair of gloves and a small toolkit. "I'll start taking samples. If you can remember anything about the crash or your ship, it might help us understand more." Carly nodded and began to recount the details of the attack. The shadow came out of nowhere. It was like a storm of darkness. Our defenses were overwhelmed almost instantly. I was ejected before the ship was completely destroyed. Stanley set to work, carefully collecting soil and debris samples from around the crater. His thoughts raced as he considered the implications of Carly's story. He had always been an avid fan of sci-fi, but nothing had prepared him for this. As he worked, he couldn't help but notice the eerie quiet of the forest. It was as if nature itself was holding its breath. The only sounds were the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird. Carly was lost in thought, her gaze fixed on the remnants of the crater. After an hour of meticulous sampling, Stanley looked up. "All right, I think we got enough. Let's head back." As they made their way back to Dr. Harper's house, Carly spoke up. "Stanley, thank you for helping me. I know this must be overwhelming." Stanley gave her a reassuring smile. "It's definitely a lot to take in, but you're not alone. We'll figure this out together." When they arrived back at Dr. Harper's, the house was filled with the hum of machines and the glow of computer screens. Dr. Harper had already started analyzing the data from the previous night, her face a mask of concentration. "Any luck?" Stanley asked as they entered. Dr. Harper looked up, her eyes shining with a mix of excitement and concern. "I've found something. The material of the egg is definitely not from this planet. It's composed of elements we don't even have in our periodic table." Carly's eyes widened. "What does that mean?" "It means," Dr. Harper said, "that the egg is a highly advanced piece of technology or biological material. And if the shadow was able to detect and attack it, it might be capable of sensing or targeting advanced technology." Stanley's heart sank. "So, if we're trying to find a way to protect ourselves, we need to know more about how this thing operates." Dr. Harper nodded. "Exactly. And while we're figuring that out, we need to prepare for the possibility that the shadow is already aware of our investigation. It's a predatory force. It might be monitoring us." Carly's face grew pale. "You mean it could be tracking us?" "It's possible," Dr. Harper said. "We need to be careful, and we need to act quickly." As the evening approached, the team worked tirelessly, analyzing the samples, running simulations, and brainstorming strategies. The house was a whirlwind of activity, with papers strewn across tables and equipment buzzing softly. Finally, as night fell and the stars began to appear, Dr. Harper looked up, her expression grave. "We need to reach out to other experts. We can't handle this alone." Stanley nodded. "Who should we contact?" "Dr. Ian Kelly," Dr. Harper said. "He's an expert in extraterrestrial phenomena and has worked with similar cases. He might have insights that could help us." Carly took a deep breath. "Then we should reach out to him, and we need to be prepared for anything." As they wrapped up their work for the night, Stanley couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of something monumental. The universe was vast and mysterious, and their small town had become the epicenter of an interstellar conflict. He glanced at Carly, whose face was lit by the soft glow of the computer screen. Her bravery and determination were a beacon of hope in the face of the unknown. Stanley realized that whatever challenges lay ahead, he was not alone. Together, with Dr. Harper and Carly, he was ready to face the cosmic storm and uncover the secrets of the shadow. As he looked out at the star-studded sky, Stanley felt a strange sense of peace. The universe had a way of throwing unexpected twists into one's life, but he was determined to see this one through to the end. And so, under the watchful gaze of the stars, the fight against the shadow began, with Stanley, Carly, and Dr. Harper at the forefront of a battle that spanned across galaxies. The adventure had only just begun, and they were prepared to face whatever came their way. The sun set over Ridgewood, casting a golden hue across the Appalachian Mountains. Stanley Parker, Carly, and Dr. Evelyn Harper had spent the entire day preparing for their next steps. Dr. Ian Kelly had agreed to join their efforts, his expertise in extraterrestrial phenomena providing a glimmer of hope in the face of the encroaching shadow. Dr. Harper's home had transformed into a makeshift command center, filled with an array of equipment and data from their research. The atmosphere was electric with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety as the team awaited Dr. Kelly's arrival. As twilight deepened into night, the team gathered in the living room. Carly, seated by the fireplace, appeared more at ease than before, though the shadow of her past still lingered in her eyes. Stanley paced back and forth, his nerves frayed by the weight of their impending mission. Dr. Harper was engrossed in a series of complex equations on her laptop, her brow furrowed in concentration. The doorbell rang, jolting everyone into alertness. Stanley hurried to answer it, and Dr. Ian Kelly entered, his presence commanding and confident. He was a tall man with a weathered face and sharp eyes that seemed to see beyond the immediate. Dr. Kelly, Dr. Harper greeted him warmly. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." "Evelyn," Dr. Kelly replied, shaking her hand firmly. "I've been following your work for years. When I heard about this situation, I knew I had to help." The team quickly briefed Dr. Kelly on the situation, the alien egg, the shadow, and their current findings. As they spoke, Dr. Kelly listened intently, his eyes occasionally flickering with understanding and concern. "We need to be prepared for a confrontation," Dr. Kelly said, after absorbing the details. "The shadow is a formidable force. If it can detect advanced technology, it's likely capable of much more." Dr. Harper nodded. "We've been analyzing the samples and trying to understand the shadow's nature, but we need more information on its vulnerabilities. That's where your expertise will be invaluable." As the night wore on, the team worked in high gear, consolidating their research and preparing for any possible scenarios. Dr. Kelly was particularly focused on devising countermeasures against the shadow, using his knowledge of extraterrestrial phenomena. Around midnight, a sudden disturbance cut through the quiet of the night. An ominous presence seemed to hang in the air, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that sent chills down everyone's spines. Carly's face paled as she looked towards the darkened forest outside. "It's here," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "The shadow." Dr. Harper and Dr. Kelly exchanged worried glances. "We need to act quickly," Dr. Kelly said, his tone urgent. "The longer we wait, the stronger the shadow's grip will become." The team readied themselves for the confrontation. Dr. Kelly and Dr. Harper worked together to set up defensive measures while Stanley and Carly prepared to make their way to the crash site, where they hoped to find clues or technology that could help them fight the shadow. As they left the house, the moon hung low and full in the sky, casting an eerie light over the forest. The trees whispered with the wind, and the air was thick with anticipation. Stanley led the way, his heart pounding in his chest, while Carly followed closely behind. They reached the clearing, where the crater still smoldered from the impact. The ground was dark and scarred, but an unnatural, creeping shadow seemed to envelop the area, as if it were alive. "We need to find something that can help us," Stanley said, his voice steady despite his fear. "Anything from the ship or the egg." Carly nodded, her eyes scanning the wreckage. As they searched, the air grew colder, and an oppressive darkness settled over them. The shadow was drawing closer. Suddenly, a low, guttural sound filled the air, a combination of whispers and growls that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The darkness around them thickened, and the shadow's form began to materialize, a swirling mass of darkness with an almost sentient quality. Stanley and Carly could feel the intensity of its presence, an overwhelming force that sought to engulf everything in its path. Just as the shadow seemed about to strike, Dr. Harper and Dr. Kelly arrived, carrying a strange device that pulsed with a bright, otherworldly light. "This is our best chance," Dr. Kelly shouted over the din. "Activate the device and create a protective barrier." Dr. Harper hurriedly set up the device, its light cutting through the darkness like a beacon. The shadow recoiled from the light, its form shifting and writhing as if in pain. The device created a protective barrier around the team, but the shadow's relentless assault persisted. Carly, her face determined, stepped forward. "We need to use the technology from the egg," she said. "It might be the key to driving the shadow away." Stanley nodded, and together they retrieved a fragment of the egg's material from their supplies. They placed it near the device, and the combined energy created a blinding flash of light. The shadow seemed to writhe and convulse, its form breaking apart in the intense light. As the light faded, the shadow was gone, leaving the clearing eerily quiet. The team stood in stunned silence, their breath visible in the cold night air. Dr. Kelly wiped his brow, clearly exhausted. "We did it. For now, at least." Dr. Harper looked around, her expression a mixture of relief and concern. "We've pushed it back, but the shadow might regroup. We need to remain vigilant." Carly's eyes were filled with both relief and sorrow. "Thank you all. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here." Stanley placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We're in this together. We'll face whatever comes next." As they made their way back to Dr. Harper's home, the sense of victory was tempered by the uncertainty of what lay ahead. The shadow had been repelled, but its presence was a stark reminder that the universe was full of dangers yet to be discovered. Back at the house, the team regrouped and began to make plans for the future. They needed to investigate the full extent of the shadow's capabilities and prepare for any future encounters. As dawn broke, casting a pale light over Ridgewood, Stanley looked out at the forest, his thoughts a whirlwind of possibilities. The universe was vast and mysterious, and their fight against the shadow was far from over. Carly, standing beside him, gazed at the horizon with a thoughtful expression. "What happens now?" Stanley shrugged, a determined smile on his face. "We keep moving forward. We've faced the unknown and survived. Whatever comes next, we'll handle it together." And so, as the first light of day touched the Appalachian Mountains, the team stood united, ready to face the future. The cosmic storm that had brought them together was only the beginning of their journey. The shadow might have been driven away, but the universe was vast, and its secrets were waiting to be uncovered. The adventure was far from over, and the road ahead was uncertain. But with courage, determination, and the bond they had forged, Stanley, Carly, and Dr. Harper were prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that their lives would never be the same again. The stars above seemed to shimmer with the promise of new discoveries, and as the team looked towards the future, they knew that their story was only just beginning.